inspired, I think, by Ashwin Reddy and other members who give a series of speeches on a common theme. I will give 3 speeches over time about 3 individual Americans who played pivotal historical or scientific roles, but are forgotten or overlooked. One is Alfred Loomis, who led the team that developed radar in the Second World War, which was the most important technology after Oppenheimer's. The second is J.J. Gibson, a perceptual psychologist who discovered how people and animals move through their sense of vision, and his influence is vast without anyone knowing. The third person that I'll talk about tonight is from the 1800s, Cassius Clay. And yes, that is the birth name of Muhammad Ali, the boxer. Whether there's a link between them isn't known. But the first Cassius Clay was critical in eliminating slavery in the US and probably pivotal in Russia's elimination of serfdom. This Cassius Clay is not famous. In the 1800s, the Clays were one of the most influential political families in the US. They included a dozen congressmen, 3 senators from the South, Alabama, Kentucky, Virginia. Best known was Henry Clay from Kentucky, who was Speaker of the House, a senator, a Secretary of State. He was a compromiser, supported the gradual elimination of slavery, and he ran for president something like 3 times and lost. His son and nephew, Cassius, served in the Mexican-American War. Junior, his son, was killed, Cassius taken prisoner, and was sympathetic to the Mexican side because it opposed slavery. Cassius was also a Kentucky politician, but he was an abolitionist, and these 2 things were incompatible. And he was known as a great Bowie knife fighter. He debated the issue, the slavery issue, in public, which was unique, introducing a generation of people to ideas they would never have heard. It was very unusual to debate slavery in a slave state. And people tried to kill Cassius in or after these debates. And that's why he was known as a great Bowie knife fighter, because several times he mauled or killed people who tried to kill him in these debates. In fact, his opponents hired an assassin to shoot him, but the bullet hit his knife, which reduced its impact, and then basically Clay tackled the assassination, cut him up, and threw him over an embankment. It was a different time. He started an anti-slavery newspaper in Kentucky, received death threats, and set up 2 large cannons in the newspaper office. So it was like war. Mobs would attack. He would defend. Most white Southerners hated Cassius Clay, and in fact, many still do. But some of them listened because he was a force. There was no one else like him in the South. And the current of history is a little like a river. A big rock in the river makes water flow around it, causes turbulence, erodes the riverbank, and sometimes that can lead the river to flow in a different path. Nationally, Clay wasn't a radical abolitionist, but in the South, which was so skewed politically, he was. And he was a friend of Abraham Lincoln before Lincoln was president. So when Lincoln was elected, he appointed Clay ambassador to Russia. The Civil War broke out, however, before he left, and Clay organized a troop that defended the White House and other DC places from a Confederate attack. Then he went to Russia. In St. Petersburg, he was popular. And by this time, his views on emancipation were quite articulate. Some historians suggest Clay influenced basically his friend, Tsar Alexander II, to abolish serfdom, which Alexander did in the Emancipation Edict of 1861. Clay was certainly instrumental in securing Russia's support for the Union. Alexander sent his fleets to both the east and west coasts of the US, and they had orders to enter the war on the Union side if Britain or France entered on the side of the Confederacy. Like Benjamin Franklin's diplomacy in the US Independence War, which secured French support against Britain, Clay's diplomacy in Russia was more important than any single battle on a field. Britain and France were afraid of a unified US getting powerful, so they supported a split up, even if they didn't support slavery. Lincoln then recalled Clay because he needed Union Army generals, and Clay refused publicly unless Lincoln would emancipate slaves. So then Lincoln sent Clay to border states to test the mood for emancipation, and Clay told Lincoln the public was ready, and Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And Clay became a general for a year. Then he was sent back to Russia to shore up the relationship, and he remained there without his family for 6 years. Clay negotiated the purchase of Alaska from the Russians. How is it that we don't know about this guy? In Russia, Clay developed quite an appreciation of ballet, including a leading ballerina. They had a child, and when Clay returned to the US in 1869, he brought the boy with him. His marriage fell apart, and he became something of a recluse. A notorious recluse, because as an old man, he married a very young woman, and efforts to remove her from his estate did not go well. He still had cannons, and they still fired on target, and she wasn't willing to leave. However, this episode has demoted his reputation in Kentucky and probably elsewhere. And I think it's why we haven't heard anything about him. Now, there may be or may not be some thread of actual ancestry linking the Clays and Muhammad Ali's family. Ali's father was very proud of the name. Of course, Muhammad Ali changed his name when he adopted Islam. And he honestly said he didn't know what strands of ancestry contributed to his skills, didn't really care. But the Cassius Clay of the 1800s was critical in changing border states like Kentucky's attitudes towards slavery. There's a lot of social psychology research that shows a strong, independent, contrarian voice can change a much larger group's views. And this isn't just, or wasn't just standing up and speaking truth. Imagine if after a speech you had to fight your way out of a room against people who tried to kill you. Clay ensured Lincoln's survival when the Civil War broke out, and ensured that England and France didn't enter the war on the Confederacy side. He may have influenced the Tsar to make an emancipation edict, and certainly he influenced Lincoln to make his. He arranged the purchase of the largest state in America. Consider if Russia still controlled Alaska. I hope you will agree with me that America's had two Cassius Clays in its history. One became the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time and was perhaps the most recognized human being on the planet. The earlier Cassius is largely forgotten. Thank you.